in order to tune into these things, you have to become a better person. You have to become more compassionate. You have to become more humble. You have to become more lighthearted, more vulnerable. A schizophrenic is someone who cannot tell the difference between this reality and another reality. A clairvoyant, a psychic, is a positive version of schizophrenia. We could just tell the difference. If you're constantly focusing on problems to solve inside yourself, well, you're just going to attract more problems to solve.
Like, why do you refer to it as magic? Welcome to Conversations with Kaizen. At the beginning of this episode, you'll hear me refer to the podcast as Rational Mystic. And that's because this is one of the first episodes of the podcast, and at the time, I was calling the podcast Rational Mystic. But very quickly, I realized that although rational mysticism is one of the things that I want to talk about in my podcast, it's not the entirety of what I wanted to talk about. And Conversations with Kaizen better represents the entire scope of the podcast, which is not just about rational mysticism, but also about culture and geopolitics and different issues plaguing society. So enjoy this episode of Conversation with Kaizen, aka formerly known as Rational Mystic. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rational Mystic. I'm your host, Kaizen Asiadu, and today we have our guest, David Lyon, here to bring us into the realm of the mystical, the expansive, and the spiritual. And as always on Rational Mystic, I am here to help assemble a rational framework for all of our thinking minds to understand what's going on. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, bro.
Yes, sir.
So, David is a world-famous hypnotist, healer, mystic, and the list of hyphens goes on. And he's known for performing for Drake. You can see that video on YouTube, and it's crazy. Joe Budden. He's known for curing people of gallstones, curing people of epilepsy. He runs a movement called Living Magic, and he has a collective experience called Soul Medicine. And this man is not just someone who is incredibly impactful in the current world, he's been impactful in my life personally too. So to give you a story for how I met David at a podcast actually, which is really funny. And at that podcast, I just immediately connected with him. And one of the things we first talked about was a very esoteric book called The Teachings of Law of One, Raw Contact. And it was a book that I'd never talked to anyone about because I was kind of shy about the fact that I'd even read it because it's super esoteric. People were talking about how it's a channel document. But with David, I felt so safe to talk about it. And that started a friendship that has really changed my life because the thing that I like most about David is he clearly is so tapped into his genius, but he holds it so humbly and confidently at the same time. And you can see so many videos on YouTube of him with his hypnosis, with his street magic, constantly astounding people. But when you meet him, his genius is so gentle. And he has this knowing of his gifts and of himself that makes everyone around him feel more comfortable and more connected with their gifts. So today, what we're going to be doing is talking about David's craft, hypnosis, and magic, and what that actually means. And we'll also be talking about how you can bring that into your own life in a way that feels grounded, in a way that feels rational, and still preserves that mysticism. So, how's that sound, bro?
Damn, bro. That was quite the intro. I love it, bro.
You deserve that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Cool. So I just said a lot of terms, and I talked about magic several times there.
Yeah.
And we're definitely not going to have a podcast called Rational Mystic where we don't talk about what that actually means.
Right.
So in the time that I've known you, you've made a distinction between stage magic and real magic several times. What's real magic?
You know, it's one of those things that I've played with the meaning many times because it's so hard to capture in words something that's so ineffable and something that's so infinite, you know, because it's really a feeling. When you feel magic, you know it. The best way I've learned to understand what magic is it's quite literally the moment that we create from. You know, magic is the fabric of our universe. It's a fabric of our existence. We don't quite understand what existence is. It's magical. So when we know how to pull from the moment, using our intuition, using our inspiration, and meeting that with action, we bring magic into the world. Whether that looks like creating moments of synchronicity through taking aligned action, or whether it looks through things like energy work and magic and healing and psychic phenomena and things of that nature. So I never quite know, to be honest, how to capture the definition of magic, but hopefully I'll be able to convey it as we move forward. Yeah.
One of the things you just said there that I really loved is the fabric of the universe. Like magic is the fabric of the universe, I believe what you said. And the first book that we connected about, The Teachings of the Law of One, Raw Contact, in it, they define magic as the ability to use the unconscious mind consciously.
Yes.
So I'm curious, especially as someone who is a hypnotist and works with the unconscious mind every day, does that definition feel like it captures what you're talking about when you say magic?
100%. I would say, yeah, it captures the ability of magic. When you talk about magical ability is to be able to consciously use the so-called unconscious. So I would say for that slice of the pie for sure, but magic is a pretty big pie. Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the rest of the pie.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time when people talk about magic, it feels like it's something that's immediately off-putting. Like, oh, it's supernatural, breaking the laws of physics. So I'm trying to get clear on your definition here, just so we can have a ground base for the discussion. Do you consider magic supernatural, like breaking the laws or transcending the laws of physics?
I consider magic to be supernatural, like as in very natural. It's the most natural thing in the universe. I don't know that answers the question, but I guess when people think of supernatural, I think they're thinking things more fictionary. They're thinking like, okay, magic is, I don't know, shooting beams out of your hands and being able to fly from one building to another or something like that. I mean, I guess that can happen. It's possible. I don't know how probable that is, but for me, in 2 words, magic is infinite possibility. And the probability of those possibilities has to do with your wherewithal within your own beingness, like your ability to work with energy and work with your own heart and so many different factors.
So when you say supernatural, we could actually substitute that with very natural.
Yes.
So it's like the most natural thing in the world, you're saying.
100%.
So by that definition, I'm curious, is there anything that's not magical in your worldview? Is there a distinction? Got it. So everything is actually magical.
100%.
Okay. So if someone were to have a magical quality,
yeah.
So your movement is called living magic. What is living magically if everything is already magic?
Well, for me, living magic is the opposite of living misery. So many people live through exhaustion and through force and through frustration and anxiety and depression and things like that, thinking that this is the way life just has to be. But it doesn't. The way that I've created my lifestyle has been purely through passion, through joy, through play. I've never believed in hard work. I've never believed in efforting for things. I've never believed in pushing for things. I don't experience stress. I've rarely experienced anxiety, and it's not because I'm special. It's just because I understand the inner workings of these things. I understand that stress means you're not doing something your soul's way, and so when I speak of living magic, I'm speaking to the highest potential of the human being and what's possible for them if they were to choose to live from a space of more intuition, more inspiration, more creativity, as opposed to feeling like they need to force their ways through life.
So is the signature of magic always ease?
I would say it's one of the qualities of it. Yeah, I don't know what the signature is other than possibility. Yeah.
So this is really interesting because, as we said before, there's a distinction that you make between stage magic and real magic.
Yeah.
So what makes, if everything is magic,
Yeah.
because everything is natural and it doesn't transcend the laws of physics, what makes stage magic not real magic? Like, what do you mean when you say real?
Well, stage magic is illusion, right? And illusion is the way that you think I'm doing something isn't the way that I'm doing something. It literally comes from the Latin word illudere, which means to play. So I'm playing with your senses. I'm playing with reality. Real magic for me is, as an example, I remember one time I was chilling with my boy Kyle, and he happened to say to me, he's like, "Oh man, I have a really bad pain in my side over here." And I was like, "Oh, do you want me to remove it for you?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Do you want me to remove it for you?" He's like, "Sure." And I have a way of going inside my world and entering his energetic field, removing that pain within a matter of seconds and alleviating him of what was happening. That wasn't an illusion. That was very real magic, in the sense of I was applying my intelligence, my intuition, my inspiration, my imagination, and meeting it with an action in order to create a result. So I'm impacting his consciousness, I'm impacting his experience through my own intentions.
So if I were to summarize what you said to make sure that I understand it.
Yeah.
Everything is magic at some level.
Yeah.
But some of it is the magic of perception. So that's what illusion work is.
Yeah.
You're making someone think that something is happening that's not happening.
Yes.
And that some of it is substantively real. So if you remove, you showed me a testimonial of you having removed the gallstone from someone, or someone having been cured of the epilepsy in one session with you. So that's real magic because the experience is actually different. It's not just a perception.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that real magic in the way that I'm using it. I mean, that was healing hypnosis. What I used for the gallstones, to cure the guy of gallstones and to cure the epilepsy, I used my clairvoyance and intuition to see what the root cause was. But once I knew the root cause, I applied a form of healing hypnosis I developed called soul medicine to alleviate it.
So now I want to make sure I'm really clear on the terms, because you do all of these things,
Yeah.
but they're all different in your mind, I can tell.
Yeah.
So what is hypnosis when you do something like soul medicine?
Yeah.
What is hypnosis doing that you would not call real magic?
That's a good question, because on one hand, I could say hypnosis is a form of real magic. It's pretty magical, but, it gets tricky because when people feel like they could explain something scientifically, especially, in their minds, that means, okay, it's not magic. But to me, science and magic are intimately linked. Even if we go back to the book of Thoth, the Emerald Tablets, it's literally called science magic. Everything that I do in terms of what I'm calling real magic, whether it's energy work or whatnot, I can explain it very simply. So there is a science to it. So just because it could be explained simply doesn't mean that it's not magic. So on one hand, I do perceive hypnosis as a form of real magic, but I use the word hypnosis just because people get that. But if we didn't happen to have a word for hypnosis, I would call it magic. I would just call it living magic. Like if I'm able to go up to someone, drop them into a trance, click my fingers, and all of a sudden tell them I'm Drake or that they're in the Fiji Islands. If you didn't know what hypnosis was, you'd be like, that's magic, right? But just because there's a science behind it and we have an explanation, we're like, okay, we're just going to call that hypnosis. So that's what I said, it's very tricky to capture it.
So there's a really good quote here to that point, which is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which is by Arthur C. Clarke. So it's actually really interesting because there's a sense in which, if we go back to the dawn of humanity, everything felt like magic because we didn't have a scientific understanding of things. And then as we solve things successively and we understand the atoms and the molecules and the different interactions between them, then we call it science.
Yeah.
But it's still working within the realm of manipulating possibility or changing reality in a way.
Yes.
So hypnosis is actually really interesting by the definition because there's plenty of science on hypnosis, and there's apps by people like Dr. David Spiegel at Stanford. It's called Reverie. It's a hypnosis app. But if you look at the research, we don't really understand how hypnosis works. We just know that it definitely works.
Right.
So from your perspective, how is hypnosis working when it's working on people? Because I understand it's a subset of real magic, but it feels a little bit more methodological.
Yeah, only because we've found the methods, we've broken it down, right? Because again, had we not, it would just seem like, oh, that's magic. We just write it off as that's magic. But the way hypnosis works from my viewpoint is we're tapping into the same part of the brain that we use when we sleep and we dream at night. So when you're dreaming at night, no matter what's happening, you believe it's real. You believe the circumstance you're in, you believe the person you are, you believe if you're flying or if there's monsters or whatever it is. So it's that part of your brain, that part of your mind where there's infinite possibility. coming back to the definition of magic. So hypnosis calls forth that part of the brain and has you access it in a deliberate way outside of just going to sleep at night.
So is that part of the brain, the unconscious?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm curious, just as a layperson who wants to believe all of this, like at a deep level, and I think most people want to believe in magic, but it's just hard because the term magic is so loaded. Why don't you just call it working with the unconscious mind? Like, why do you refer to it as magic? Because clearly that's an intentional decision.
Well, when I'm doing hypnosis, I do refer to it as hypnosis. I do refer to it as working with the unconscious mind. I'll use the term magic when I'm blending so many different things together that you don't know what's what anymore. That's generally where I'll start to use the word magic. And again, like when I'm doing things that are seemingly impossible with energy, if I'm doing some form of energetic manipulation, that to me is real magic. You know, it doesn't make sense on, you know, to the physical mind what's happening until you start to break it down. So I totally realize how the word magic is a bit of a blanket statement, but that's why I said in the beginning, for me, it's a feeling. You know, it's a feeling that gets evoked. You know, there's a old saying that the yogis used to say, which is, it's not what the eyes can see that is the magic of life. It's that the eyes can see that is the magic of life. It's not what the ears can hear that is the magic of life. It's that the ears can hear that is the magic of life. And that starts to give you a little bit of a portal into what's meant by magic.
So by that definition, is magic a perspective? Is it a magical perspective on hearing, a magical perspective on seeing?
It can be. It can be a perspective. And I would say it's also a reality because, again, it's the fabric of our universe. It's the fabric of existence. We cannot comprehend the cosmos or existence with our physical minds. For me, that's magic.
So now run me through what it's like in your head when you're healing someone or doing anything that evokes magic.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also blended with hypnosis. Sometimes.
Yeah.
So when it's blended with hypnosis, do you sometimes think, okay, I'm doing hypnosis right now, and other times like, no, I'm doing energy work right now, and then other times I'm doing magic? Or is there, actually, let's stay with that.
I don't really put a thought to it. There's no part of me that when I'm being of service to someone where I'm like, okay, now I'm going to do hypnosis and then I'm going to do energy work and then I'm going to use channeling and intuition. For me, my approach is magic. Like the energy that I emit is magic. There's certain things that happen to people in my presence that activates magical things. Sometimes, you know, certain spiritual gifts come online or spontaneous healing or things of that nature. So for me, when I'm doing healing, essentially what I'm doing is the first thing I do is I bring myself into a very vibrant state, a very high vibrational state. I actually call it the magic state. It's a state where I'm just fully lit up. I literally feel all the cells in my body very, very lit up. So it's a state of well-beingness. It's a state of harmony. It's a high vibrational state. From that state, I'm going to use the word God here because that's my experience of it. I allow for God to take place. Let me try my best to capture this. I will go into a state of harmony, the magic state, and I will ask God to guide me. And there's just something that takes over. There's something that tells me where to place my hands. There's something that tells me what to say, so that whether I have to use words or not, if I place my hands on someone's body, things will start to change inside of them. Pains will start to get removed, be it emotional or physical. And what I'm doing is I'm creating the opportunity for them to resonate with the energy that I'm giving off. So it's not actually me healing them. It's me creating the opportunity for them to resonate because they want to be healed. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So to recapitulate what you just said, it's basically as if the other person is actually engaging in the magic with you, right? So the other person who, in this case, the example, wants to be healed, they are resonating with you, and you provide almost like a catalyst or like a tuning fork for their healing.
Exactly. Tuning fork is the perfect word.
Okay. So now what I want to understand is, you talked about God, and obviously that's a term that means different things to different people. But by God, I think we can all agree something that is beyond just you.
Yeah, I could replace the word with unconditional love.
Okay, great. So you embody God, embody unconditional love. So in that state, are you choosing what to do at all?
No.
Interesting.
No, it's completely guided. It's as soon as I go into the magic state, so to speak. So let me back it up a little bit. Usually people will come to me with their desires or their problems. I usually say your desire is all I require. So they'll say to me like, hey, I really need help with this, whatever this is. When they say that to me, as I go into my state, as I light myself up, I'll feel and sense any differences between my current state of magic, basically the state that they want to get themselves to for the healings to happen. I'll feel any differences between my state and the state that they're in. And there's almost like a weaving that starts to take place. Like I start to feel where each step is wanting to happen through my movement, through my voice, through my words, through my touch. And I weave them into the vibration of their desire.
Okay, so if we think of this, even I think we can almost remove the God and unconditional love piece, and even just look at this from an emotional standpoint.
Yes.
Right. So there's a state that you believe that people need to be in to heal.
It's a state of well-being. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So a state of well-being. So am I correct in saying that when you enter that state, you influence them to enter that state as well?
I create the opportunity for it.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then they have to opt into that. They have to be willing to enter that state, I assume.
Right. And usually if they're coming to me for a session, then that opt-in is there.
Got it.
Yeah.
And in that intentionality, they then embody the same state that you do, and then the healing happens.
They will take on qualities of the state I'm in that they need in order to have the healing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I see that you're making a distinction there between me saying they embody the state, and you're saying they embody qualities of the state.
Yeah.
So what's the difference that you're trying to hone in on there?
I think the difference is that I don't think anyone will ever feel like me. So whatever state I go into, I don't know that everyone or that anyone goes into the exact same state, but I know that there are beneficial elements of the state I'm in that they can harmonize with, like a tuning fork.
So I'm going to give you a layperson's attempt to make this into a framework that I understand.
Cool.
Based on a layperson's scientific understanding of things.
Yeah.
So we know that, for instance, nervous systems co-regulate with one another, right? So my nervous system with your nervous system, they're syncing up even in this very moment that we're talking. Yeah. Obviously, we know that there's different states of the nervous system. So you can be in sympathetic state, so fight, freeze. You can be in parasympathetic, which is rest and repair. We also know that if I'm in a certain state, I will influence you to be in that state too.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a useful analogy for understanding how you're influencing people, that basically you are influencing them to be in the same state that you are as well, even if it's not the exact same thing?
I think it could be. I don't know, to be honest. I like to break down what I do as 3 parts. It's love, skill, and wisdom. Through going into a genuine state of compassion, a genuine state of love, there's certain places inside of each person that won't open up unless they feel safe, unless they feel a certain amount of love and compassion. They won't even know that they have certain pains unless there's a certain amount of love that's present. So the love is the most essential piece. So it's going into a state of what I'm calling love so that they feel safe to open up and explore their wounds and issues and have realizations. Then I apply skill. My skill can be in the hypnotic realm, and energy work realm, clairvoyant realm, whatever that might be. And the wisdom is just that I've generally walked the walk. Most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, the issues that people come in with, I could relate to on some level, and have either transcended that or I've worked through it to a larger degree. So I have the wisdom and the insights to offer them on top of the love and skill that I'm providing.
So this is a really interesting way of breaking down what you do, because it's almost like there's a skill component, right? And obviously that's why you're very good at what you do, because you have repetition.
Yeah.
The wisdom component, it comes from your personal experience relating to the experience that they're going through.
Yes.
Okay. And then there's an aspect to all of this that is just you embodying a certain state and then influencing them from that state, which is love.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm curious, when we talk about channeling, because you've mentioned channeling and clairvoyance and all that, what do you mean by channeling?
By channeling, I mean getting into the zone, getting into the flow state. It's signified by the brain going into a gamma frequency. So when you're in a channeling state, you're not thinking, you're not needing to figure things out, you're receiving thought, you're receiving insights, you're receiving wisdom. And so there's not like this going on in the brain. You're not like, okay, what do I do? You're just receiving what I call pings. You're receiving these little hits that tell you what to do or that guide you in what to say, so that you could provide the person with not just the information they need, but the frequency, the feeling of information they need. Because there's a difference between telling someone like, yeah, I love you, and like, I love you. Right? There's an energetic difference in the way I delivered those words. So through channeling, I'll receive the quality of energy that they need to feel and hear along with the words or along with the actions, so that it really resonates very deeply with them. And with channeling, it can just be, receiving wisdom and inspirations. Other times it could be speaking to spirit guides or other dimensional beings and angels, if you want to go in that direction. But in essence, everyone accesses the channeling state, whether you're an artist who just receives, this is the painting you need to paint, and it feels like it's being painted through them, or when someone is a musical artist and they're like, oh, I have to stop everything and write a song. They're channeling that. So it's a very natural state of being.
In describing channeling, you mentioned spirit guides.
Yes.
So we're going to go in that direction.
Yes.
Because I do want to understand that. There's no way I'm just going to let that slide without asking a question around it, right? So a few times, or not even a few times, a lot of the time around me, you've mentioned Thoth or Thoth, who is the Egyptian god or deity generally associated with wisdom, and the Greeks associated him with wisdom as well, called him Hermes. And it's tough because when I hear that, I'm like, damn, I want to believe that, but how the fuck do you know? Like, how do you know that it's Thoth or Thoth? So clearly, I can tell you're sincere, and I can tell you're channeling that with total confidence, or you say it with total confidence. But how do you know?
It's the same way. It's the same way when your mom's talking to you that it's not you, that there's someone else talking to you. There's a different being, a different energy, different intelligence speaking to you. You recognize it as different than yourself. It's the same way I'll know when I'm speaking to different beings that I'm like, this is a different consciousness. I mean, sure, on the grand scheme of things, it's all one consciousness. And so we could say on the highest level, it's all me, it's all, it's all source. But on the human level, it's clear to me because I'm also being taught things that I don't know. And that's part of the most fascinating thing for me, is whether it's Thoth or whether it's the spirit guides, the distinction I've learned to make is, my intuition will generally tell me things that I know deep within. My guides will tell me things that I don't know, and I'll learn all kinds of new things. And that's kind of one of my marker points. And more than that, it's just you just experience them that way. Yeah.
Okay, so basically the hallmarks of you channeling what you perceive as a consciousness other than you are A, that you're learning things or being told things that you don't know, or at least consciously you don't know. And B, it sounds like there's a sense in which it's literally coming outside of you.
Yes.
Just like if you were hear me talking to you, you're like, hey, that's not me, that's Kaizen talking to you. Okay. Now, I looked up your video of you talking to Bashar.
Yes.
It's very funny because it's like this guy's channeling Thoth while talking to this guy named Daryl who says he's channeling Bashar. So I thought it was just quite hilarious. And Bashar, when you asked him one of the questions, he replied back in a really interesting way. And here's what he said. You use your own imagination to apply the energy that you relate to as Thoth when you think of it. So the key words there are imagination, relate, and think.
Yeah.
So it seems to me what he's saying is there's this thing that you imagine and you think of it as Thoth. That's a label.
Yeah.
And then you relate to it, which is different than saying it's a literal being.
I would be careful with how you're defining imagination in that context.
Okay.
Because I could tell when you're saying imagination, it's almost like, oh, it's just imagination. But our imagination is literally the conduit between our physical mind and our higher mind. It is a realm unto itself. So for me, in my experience, it's not just your imagination. Our imagination is just one of the viewfinders that we use to interact with different energies beyond the physical realm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. David, I want to follow you all the way there. So I'm going to ask questions until I get there with you.
Let's go.
Okay. So I hear you in that we shouldn't dismiss imagination as just imagination.
Yeah.
Right? Because imagination is both creative, like we create things literally by thinking of it first, and there's a sense in which literally just imagining something changes your state immediately. So we all know what it's like to imagine the best time in your life and you'll probably feel joy. Or imagine the worst time in your life and you might feel despair or sadness.
Yeah.
Where I'm getting stuck, and I think a lot of listeners will get stuck, is saying, okay, I'm imagining, and that's almost like it's like a telephone call to some other conscious being.
Yeah.
So explain to me, how do you distinguish imagining something that is purely conceptual versus imagining as a link to something that actually exists?
Well, I'll give you an exercise in a moment that you could do.
Oh boy, homework.
Yeah. And I just want to speak to, when I first met Thoth, it wasn't in my imagination realm. It was in physical reality. It was Thoth showing up to me in the physical realm while I was at a marketing workshop of all places. And it was very much a surprise. So it wasn't that I was there like thinking of Egyptians or Thoth or anything like that. This was all of a sudden this body of light, this being of light shows up next to me. It was actually on my left side. And immediately when I saw him, my heart recognized who it was. It was like an instant knowing that, oh, this is Thoth. And it was like, what are you doing here? So I just say that to say that it doesn't all take place in the imagination realm, but that's just one of the places where we can have experiences. But as an exercise, something that most people don't think to do is to look around your imagination realm, right? We often look at our imagination when we're being creative or we're thinking of things, but rarely does anyone think of exploring your imagination realm just for the sake of it, just actually looking around. So you could do this with eyes open or closed, but take a moment and actually look around your imagination realm and feel the sensation, feel the experience of looking around your imagination. And you'll see it has a certain kind of texture to it. You may or may not be seeing pictures or images or shapes, but you'll have a sense that you're exploring that realm. You with me so far? Mm-hmm. Good. Now, as you're exploring that realm, do so playfully. Be curious. This is where I always say the divine child is the God within, because it's the energy of the divine child, or what I'm calling the divine child, that gives us access to these realms and these higher senses. So just playfully look around the imagination realm. Notice different shapes, different textures, different images, whatever you might be noticing. And then whenever you're ready, I want you to set the intention on the inside to connect with one of your spirit guides. Whether you think they're real or not, whether you believe they're real or not, just set that intention. And you'll notice an intelligence appear somewhere in that sphere. An energy, an intelligence that will kind of like catch your interest. Let me know once you have that. Now, what you'll notice is as you interact with that energy, whether you ask it questions or whether you're just being present with it, you can't control it. Everything else in your imagination, you can control because you have creative ability, but this energy, this being, you can't control no matter what you do. And you might even ask it, what's your name? Sometimes it gives a name, sometimes not. But let me know what your experience is.
I feel silly even saying it, but a lion.
A lion.
A lion.
Cool.
Which is, it's not the first time.
Oh, interesting.
And I also noticed a bit of resistance, right? Because there's a piece, and I'm sure many people have this, where it's like, oh, you want to believe that. You would like to believe that because it sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually really curious, right? Because it's like, yeah, what's wrong with believing in something that sounds good?
Yeah.
But on the flip side, what I don't want to do is believe something's true just because it feels good.
Of course.
So how do I know that what I'm imagining, and now we've identified imagination doesn't mean that it's false.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that it's imagined. How do I know that it's true?
One marker point is noticing and sensing the intelligence of it, right? If it was just a picture in your imagination, it would just be a visual. There's no sense of intelligence beyond you, right? But you probably noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably noticed when you connected with that energy, with that being, it had its own sense of intelligence. It was something that was not just in Kaizen. Is that fair to say?
I felt that to a degree. What it kind of felt like to me was, I felt like like the lion,
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to I'm imagining a lion.
Yep.
So that's the closest I got.
Okay, cool. And so if you were to continue that interaction, you strengthen your coherence with it, because you're interacting with a different vibratory level than you're used to. We were using the energies of the divine child of play and curiosity to raise your vibrational frequency to even be able to perceive these things and to play around in the imagination realm. So that's something that most people don't do. So you're going to get new experiences. And then from there, I had you use intention to pick up the phone essentially and call one of your spirit guides. And you noticed there was a reaction. There was a bit of a smile like, oh, wow, like, that surprised me, or like, I've seen him before. Like, so there was something that lit up inside before it even hit the doubts of your mind. And so this is where, as a practice of mastery or as a practice of mysticism, we start to play with the richness and subtleties to see the reality of these things. And at the end of the day, I think what matters most is not so much whether it's real or not. I mean, in my experience, it's very real. But what you get from that energy, is it useful? That's what matters most. It's like when I'm speaking to my grandmother and she's asking me about how I do what I do, and because she sees, there was a time where she would see me do a lot of sessions out of her house, and she would ask me questions about what I'm helping people with and how I do what I do. I didn't go into talk about like, oh, well, I'm tuning into their guides and their guides are giving me information that's going to change their lives. For her, it was just, well, I feel into them and I reflect truth to them in a way that they can feel it. So it's not about the messenger, it's about the message. But the messengers are fun.
The messenger is definitely fun.
Yeah.
It's funny because I noticed this, like, almost this fear of believing in imagination, almost as if I'll go crazy or I'll start doing things that are erratic, which, is a genuine concern. And yet, when people are children, we hopefully encourage their imagination.
Yeah.
And there's a sense in which a child is cognizant of the fact that it's imagination and there's real and there's a distinction, but there's not this dismissiveness of imagination that children have. Why do you think we have so much dismissiveness as adults of our imagination?
I think it's just the culture and society. We're told to, you got to grow up, stop believing in those silly things. It's time to be an adult, so you're conditioned to become who you think you're supposed to be out of who you truly are. And that's actually one of my main principles when I'm teaching people about channeling, and I'm teaching people about accessing their gifts and intuition and even deeper creativity and dreams that they've forgotten about in their heart. I'll have them take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. And on one side, you write who I think I need to be. And on the other side, you write who I truly am. And the beauty of being in a world of duality is that as soon as you identify who you think you need to be, I think I need to be serious. I think I need to be tough. I think I need to be guarded. I need to be professional. I have to be like this. As soon as you identify serious, well, immediately, because of duality, you're going to know, well, actually, I'm kind of silly, right? Guarded, open. And so what you're doing is you're making clear for yourself what your true vibration is and what beliefs you've unconsciously taken on. And then you have the opportunity to let go of those beliefs that don't serve you. Anything that's hard to let go of, it's usually because you have an emotional tie to it or a trauma associated to it. And that requires a little bit more. The idea is the sooner you let go of who you think you need to be, the sooner you become more of who you truly are again, and you attune to the radio station in your consciousness where your gifts exist, where your intuition exists, all these things that are already there, but you were just not on that dial.
It's funny because it's like, in a sense, you're imagining all the time anyway. You're either imagining who you think you are and who you're supposed to be, or you're imagining who you actually are.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess if you're so stuck imagining who you think you're supposed to be and you're acting that way, you actually need to imagine who you are to become what you really are.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say imagining who you really are, but you're more so noticing, recognizing, literally recognizing, reintegrating it into your brain who you really are. Because that's the core of your being. You could use imagination to access what you already know, but it's in there. Know thyself, right? As you have on top of your door.
Right there,
yeah.
So as you were talking about that, you pointed out your heart center. Mm-hmm. And you talked a lot about knowing, and you even said noticing, mm-hmm. which it seems like is different than imagination for you. Mm-hmm. So what's the connection between the heart and knowing in your model of the world?
Your heart is in resonance with your knowingness. That's your way of knowing what's true for you, what rings true. It lands in our heart, and this is where I always say the heart speaks simple. So if you're juggling thoughts in your head or juggling intuitions or ideas, generally what we'll do is at some point we'll get down to the one that really just feels most true to our heart, that just feels true to us on a core level, and be like, yep, that resonates, right? That's our resonance happens on a heart level. If we want to go esoteric with it, the higher self resonates with our heart. When our higher self gives us information, our heart is the space where that resonance happens, and we go, yep, got it, that makes sense. I feel that, that feels true, that rings true. So does that answer the question?
It does. And here's part of my curiosity. So I used to be very disconnected from myself. Literally, when people said, follow your heart, listen to your heart, it didn't even make sense. I didn't know, couldn't feel that. Mm-hmm. And now I'm watching you point at the center of your chest, but it's like, we know anatomically the physical heart is to the left. Mm-hmm. But the weird thing is I understand what you mean, because now I can actually feel my heart center. And I remember the first time that I actually felt, I was like, whoa, like, holy shit, it's not just some saying. Like, I can literally feel my heart and it's in the center.
Yeah.
What should someone do if they can't feel that yet? Like, the version of me who existed 4 years ago, I literally couldn't even feel that. So I'm not sure what I could know.
Trauma work is essentially the short answer. When we have certain traumas built up inside of us, it creates constriction and density, literally like a feeling of hardness around the heart, to the point where we could just feel numb to certain sensations, and then that becomes our normal, so that we don't even recognize that there's certain things we're not sensing until things change. So if people are having trouble being sensitive to other people's emotions, or literally even feeling other people's emotions, or feeling empathy or compassion, any of those things, chances are creativity. Chances are they have traumas in the heart that need to be looked at. You know, I remember one story for me. When I was first developing my gifts, I couldn't understand. So I started off speaking and seeing spirit guides, but I wasn't quite understanding what it meant to really feel energy yet. You know, I had heard about it and it seemed cool, but it's like I was imagining what that actually was as opposed to experiencing. And then at one point, my mentor at the time, he's like, well, you need to learn to be more sensitive. He's like, you're not really sensitive to people. I'm like, well, if you're sensitive, then you're going to feel other people's emotions. I'm like, why would I want to feel other people's crap? I'm like, I have my own crap to deal with. He's like, well, that's a question that you have to seek with yourself. And so I made a request to life. I'm like, life, teach me the importance of being sensitive, because I don't get it. And then synchronicity occurred. And I remember I had a conversation with my friend who hit me up. He was going through something with his girlfriend, and he always came to me for advice. But because he was in such a deep emotional space, my logic wasn't landing for him because I wasn't being sensitive to his heart as well. You know, I'm just like, yo, just leave her. It's so clear, just leave her. Like the story he was telling me, I'm like, just leave. But, you know, the emotions aren't logical. He needed to be felt and he needed to feel understood first before he could receive any kind of guidance or direction. So that was my first marker point. I'm like, oh, if I'm not sensitive, there's certain people I won't be able to help. So that built my desire. And then I had another client come in who she starts telling me this story of how her dad makes her feel and how she feels like she has to yell just to get his attention. And I'm like, would you say that he's insensitive? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, how does that make you feel? She's like, neglected. And I was like, oh, wow. I hope I'm not making people feel neglected. So each of these pieces built up the importance and desire for me to feel sensitive. I'm like, okay, now I see the importance. Now that I get it, life helped me become sensitive again. Then again, synchronicity occurred where I found myself on a camping trip with some new friends. They were students of mine that they invited me to go camping with them. And there was a point in time where it was like this Asian clique, and they were all dancing around the fire, like laughing and dancing. And I was just sitting on the bench. And at that time in my life, it's like, I didn't feel comfortable just having fun. The way they were having fun, like they were just letting themselves be free. And I had this feeling of like, man, I feel like I don't belong. And as soon as I felt that, I felt this pain in my heart. And for the first time in so long, I started to become sensitive to my own pain that I didn't even know I had. So sensitivity started to crack through. And I remember I just broke down in tears, and, you know, I realized where this came from with my father and etc. But as I let myself cry it out, I was alleviating the density around my heart. And then suddenly I was sensitive again. And then after that moment, when I went to go lead my energy classes that I was serving at the time, I was feeling everything differently. Every single person in the room, I could feel their every emotion. I could feel everything going on inside of them in a very, very real way. So I developed it through clearing the traumas and through asking the universe for it.
Uh-huh. Wow, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Now that I reflect on your story, I remember when my heart first opened up, it was in pain.
Yeah.
I actually felt it ache, literally aching for weeks, until I went to a healer, and then they did something, and then it was like whoosh. And I could actually feel stuff again, and I could like cry at TV shows and all this stuff that I didn't used to do. And it's interesting because this idea of sensitivity, I mean, I like to think of sensitivity as the ability to sense life. Like if you're not sensitive, you're literally not taking in certain data, and you're not able to actually act on it if you're not able to take it in. So it's like almost like losing your sense of smell. If you lose your sense of smell, you're going to go through reality a lot differently. So can someone even have emotional intelligence if they don't have sensitivity?
I don't know. I think if they don't have sensitivity, I think it would be very hard. Yeah, I think it would be very hard because there's certain things that they just wouldn't be able to relate to, and they would make overly logical.
That's kind of scary to think of a world of people who are just insensitive, so they literally can't relate to each other properly.
Which is a lot of the world around us, if you think about it. And it's kind of like very often the main problem between men and women in relationship, where the woman's, this is a generalization, but if, the woman's going through an issue and she's feeling like deeply emotional and the man goes into fix-it mode. Well, here's a solution. Here's a solution. And she's like, I don't want your solutions, right? The woman just wants to be felt. She doesn't want your solutions. She just wants to be felt. She wants to be heard. She wants to be seen. She wants to be felt safe. And then after she feels that way, then she might be open towards, solutions. But that's where that's where sensitivity is so key, especially in relationships, that's one area where it's so key.
Please go back in time and tell past me this. And save my past relationships.
Yeah, I could say the same to myself.
Yeah. I remember I had an ex who, she was telling me about how deeply she felt emotion. And I remember we were like literally in the kitchen having this conversation. It wasn't like a heated conversation or anything. We're just talking about, I guess, emotions and all of that. And I told her, I just think my emotions. Like I think, oh, happy now or sad now. It was almost like this like mechanical input output thing. And in hindsight, it's like I couldn't be emotionally intelligent because I couldn't actually feel things much.
Right.
So when we talk about other things that we may be insensitive to, I know one of the things that you're really known for is intuition and tapping into intuition. What is intuition?
I would say intuition is our sense of knowing. That goes beyond belief, beyond thought. It's literally our ability to know what we need to know when we need to know it.
So this is a little bit different than the scientific understanding of intuition as I understand it, because I think a lot of the time when we talk about the scientific understanding, it's more like the unconscious processing of data and pattern recognition. So for example, a really good book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize laureate. He quotes this guy named Herbert Simon. And Herbert Simon studied a bunch of chess grandmasters, which is great because we were just playing chess last night, actually. And you won, but that was the first time playing chess in like 20 years.
Fair.
And basically what he said is that intuition is nothing but recognition. But when we talk about knowing, that's not merely recognition. It sounds like you're speaking to something else.
It sounds familiar to me, to be honest. Like when you're saying recognition of patterns, it could be that the recognition of patterns that's happening on an unconscious or subconscious level is part of what's leading to your sense of knowing. That's very possible. I don't know all the data and background behind it. I just know my experience of it. So that does make sense to me. Okay. Yeah.
But here's where I guess I'm getting stuck. Is our intuition always correct?
Define correct.
So let's say, and we have to still hone in on what intuition actually means here, but let's say you have an intuition about a person.
Yeah.
Right? And you suspect that they are dishonest.
Yeah.
Can you trust that whatever's telling you is dishonest will be correct and the person is dishonest?
I want to say always.
Always.
I want to say always.
Okay.
What I will also say is that this is where mastery comes in, because a lot of people will say, oh, I had an intuition about this person, but if you're coming from a charged place, then your intuition is distorted, right? For me, intuition is a neutral or calm or light sense of knowing. It's the difference between, the example I like to give is like, imagine a woman who's just like, I know he's cheating on me. He's with that bitch. I hope I could swear.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. He's like, I know he's cheating on me. And she's like overreactive. I'm like, I don't know how intuitive that is. Where on the flip side, there's a story of the woman who's just like really calm and just like, I don't know why, but I just know he's cheating on me. Right? So this neutral sense of knowing, and there's no reaction to it. It's just a knowing. And she's always right. I can't say always, but it more often than not, as far as I know, it's pretty accurate. But in my experience, my intuition is on point.
Okay, so let's reconcile these two views, because I still think there's something different between what you're referring to, this like knowing, and the intuition I'm referring to, which is more pattern recognition based on data that we've assimilated in our unconscious mind. So let's go back to the example of chess just for a second. So Herbert Simon studied all these chess grandmasters, and basically the moves that would appear magical to us, I'm like, whoa, how do they do that? Well, it's because they've done thousands and maybe even tens of thousands of games. So they would just like know what to do, but they would know what to do because they've seen it so many times.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so that seems. I'm wondering, actually, is that different than what you're talking about when you say intuition?
Yes, I would say there's different levels and layers to intuition. And so on one level, there's the subconscious intuition, where you've seen so many patterns so many times that when you see that pattern again, you could intuitively recognize and be like, oh, I make this move because you recognize that pattern. Then there's the intuition that we experience through our field, or our energetic field, which is more of a sensing into the rhythms of the universe, the rhythms of life. There's the intuition of the heart when you're feeling. What's an example there? When I'm feeling into somebody in a session, my heart is getting reads. It's getting these impulse reads on people that's letting me know data about them, so that I could say, for example, I might say to them, I'm like, why are you angry? And they didn't say anything about anger, but a second I say it, it hits them and they're just like, oh shit. Right?
Kind of like what happened to me yesterday. You actually did a healing session on me yesterday, and I didn't know that I was feeling anger, but you picked up on it.
Exactly. Yeah, I wasn't going to say it was you, just unless you offered it.
Someone named Eisen.
Yeah. I was being respectful. Yeah.
Respect. It's okay.
Yeah, but exactly. You were sharing certain things with me. You had no consciousness on anger, but when I was looking inside of you, I'm like, why are you angry? And then it attunes you to it, right? So there's different levels and layers to intuitive ability. I liken it to a rainbow. Certain people are embodied in certain colors of the rainbow. So let's say someone who's embodied in 3 colors of their rainbow will have a 3-color perception on reality, 3-color access to their potential. An example of that is someone who's living in the matrix, working a 9 to 5, and is like, this life is all there is. You live and then you die. You can't live life through your purpose and passions. It's like, you just got to do what you got to do. And then they have a spiritual awakening, or they have a trauma healing, or a psychedelic experience, something that tunes them into more of who they truly are. And all of a sudden they feel like more of themselves, hence they feel more colors of their rainbow. And now they have a 4-color perspective on reality and a 5 colors. So the same is true with intuition, where there's different color spectrums to what you can tap into. And one of those colors is pattern recognition, and others is the other dimensions that we play with.
Man, this is such a cool view of reality, dude.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of it like kind of like a video game.
Yeah.
Like I love RPGs,
yeah.
and I'm still gonna get you on Baldur's Gate. We'll figure it out. But in a video game, basically you have different skill trees. You have different skill trees. So let's say you're a mage, you have a fire tree, you have a lightning tree, you might have the cold spells tree. And depending on what tree you've accessed and the level at which you've accessed it, you're going to play the game very differently.
Yes.
So if you don't even have, if you haven't even unlocked the intuition tree,
yes,
it's not even going to make sense to you, right? Because you don't have the prerequisite skills to actually use intuition abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what it's like?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm wondering, because there's like, you can invest your EXP in a specific tree, but then there's also just leveling up your character.
Yeah.
So how much of what you're talking about, like magic, clairvoyance, channeling, all of this stuff, and I don't believe it all yet, but we're going to get to all of it. Mm-hmm. But let's say all of it related such that if you level up one core stat, you unlock your abilities in all of these realms?
Could you say it in a different way? I didn't catch it.
Sure. So if you look at it like these are different skill trees, right? So there's your heart knowing, there's your intuition, there's being in touch with your soul, there's clairvoyance, yep, there's your magical gifts, your spiritual gifts, all of these different things. Is there one area that if you level up, it will increase your ability in all those areas? Are these things that you've focused on individually?
That's a really good question. I don't know. So what happened for me is, so when I had my awakening in 2012, I got led through a meditation, but a particular kind of meditation, which is known as an activation experience. And the intention of it or the thinking behind it was, you know, when we're young, we often don't know how to deal with our feelings. And so because we don't know how to deal with our feelings and our pain, we start to numb ourselves out. But in order to numb ourselves out, we're not actually numbing the feelings, we're numbing our sensitivity, which allows us to sense those feelings. But when we numb that sensitivity, we're also numbing our ability to sense the energetic realm and the intuitive realm in certain ways. So we numb ourselves out, having no idea that we did that. So then we forget that we did that, which means amnesia. And then hence this whole journey of awakening that people go on. So I got led through this experience, did a 15-minute meditation, and all of a sudden all the lights were on, so to speak. I was reawakened to senses that I had forgotten about as a child, so it felt like experiencing it for the first time again. When that happened, I started to connect to spirit guides again, or what felt like the first time for me. I didn't know anything about spirit guides. I didn't remember having imaginary friends as a kid or anything like that. But I started to see these spirit guides that would literally show up in a realm near this reality. So it kind of they would look like, imagine if your imagination was superimposed over physical reality but had a life of its own. That's kind of what the experience was like. So they would pop up and they would almost like play charades with me and talk to me telepathically. So my spirit guides were there, and they were there to train me. And it first started off with, so I was leading these energy and intuition classes after my own training, and after I developed my gifts. I started to teach these energy and intuition classes because I wanted to pay forward just this magic I discovered. I'm like, the whole world needs to know how to access their gifts because this is real magic. And part of my inspiration was that in order to tune into these things, you have to become a better person. You have to become more compassionate. You have to become more humble. You have to become more lighthearted, more vulnerable, because that raises your vibrational frequency, which puts you into the vibrational vicinity of where your gifts exist. Does that make sense so far?
It does.
So I was like, wow, I get to change the world by teaching people real magic, and that makes the world a better place. So I was running these energy and intuition classes, and in the beginning, I would have my 8 or 10 students in my living room, and the guides would show up, and they would literally talk in my ear, and I would just relay what they were saying. So first, my clairaudience was being developed. So they would say, this is what we're going to be learning, and I was just repeating word after word whatever they were saying. And I'm like, man, this is so easy. Once that trait was developed, that area of the skill tree, then it switched on its own. Then all of a sudden it went to clairvoyance, where they weren't whispering to me anymore. They would show me imagery. And that was a little bit more challenging at first, because I'd be working with someone and all of a sudden they'd show me 2 people on a seesaw, let's say. And I'd have to try and interpret it. And I was like, okay, that could mean you have to get more into balance, or maybe you need to play more, or maybe you literally need to go to a park. And so there was a training element there where it took me time to learn that, oh, okay, what needs to happen here is I have to read those images with my heart, because my heart has the resonance code. My heart, when I feel the imagery with my heart, I get the correct message, and then when I feed it to them, it resonates. So then I passed that test, or I learned that skill. Once I got good at clairvoyance, that switched up, and then it was all clairsentience, and it was pure feeling. And so when I was teaching, I would get this bundle of feelings that I had to unpack on my own somehow, which seems scary because I'm like, I don't even know how to put these feelings into words. But I learned to channel them and to express them, and then that would land in certain ways. And so it's like I got brought through this training and eventually just developed all my clairsenses, and and just went on from there. Then I went to channeling and trance channeling. So it was a natural progression for me. I wasn't trying to develop certain individual traits. I think that was just part of my path, because I'm someone who works with other gifted people, other intuitives, other psychics. I have to understand how their realm works so that I can give them the guidance they need. So I don't know. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my experience of it. Yeah.
Okay. It does answer the question for me, but let me repeat back what I'm hearing just to make sure I understand. So basically, as you came back to your senses, basically, so first sensitivity to yourself and then sensitivity to others, or maybe they're simultaneous with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Then your gifts or your ability to sense other things that are not in the traditional, like, taste, touch, all that came online.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the specific order you said, but for example, I think you said clairaudience.
Yeah.
So that's basically the ability to hear things beyond what normally people can hear.
Yes.
That came online.
Yeah.
Then you reached a point where you moved on to clairvoyance. So being able to see things that other people can't see.
Yeah.
And then so on and so on and so on. So if we take the skill tree analogy, it's like you reach a level of, let's say you raised your character's level overall. You just became a better fucking person.
Yes.
And a person with more sensitivity. Once you reach a certain level, then you could start to explore clairaudience.
Yes.
And then once you reach a certain level in clairaudience, you could start to explore clairvoyance.
I don't know if it was a certain level. I think it was just relevant for my experience.
Got it.
Because I know certain psychics who aren't clairaudient at all. They're just clairvoyant, but their level of clairvoyance is on a whole other level.
Okay. This is really exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we think of it another way, then clairaudience is one tree, clairvoyance is another tree, clairsentience is another tree.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're pretty well-rounded
among
those various trees, but there may be some people who are like, if you're a clairaudient level 50, someone else is like a fucking 90.
Yeah.
They're just like really advanced, but they maybe have like no points invested in clairsentience.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah. And, what's coming to me now is generally someone who hasn't developed clairvoyance, there are certain things they genuinely don't want to see. And that could be interpreted in many different ways. In a very practical level, it's like, I don't want to see the truth, as an example. That will dim that gift. No, I don't want to feel that. That will dim the clairsentience. I don't want to hear those things. So there's a very basic mechanic to it. And so it's possible, I would imagine, I don't know if I've met, I would imagine that everyone could develop all the senses. It's entirely possible. I don't know if it's relevant for everyone's experience. Yeah.
Okay. This is really cool. I'm enjoying this.
Cool.
We're going to keep going with the video game analogies.
Yeah.
I recently went through an iboga ceremony, which I told you about. And I'm going to talk about in a later podcast episode. One of the things I noticed after iboga was I was just way more sensitive. So the first thing I really, really noticed was my clothes. Like I could literally just feel the softness of my clothes with much richer detail. And it was interesting because I don't know if I'm any of these clairs yet. I guess if I knew, I would know. So I don't know, and I'm not. But I could see how, okay, well, if I just dialed up the knob even more, I could see how I could start sensing things that I couldn't sense before at all. But I guess what's hard for me is understanding, how do you know when you're sensing something that's there versus hallucinating? Because during my iboga experience, I was hallucinating a lot. And it was actually quite scary, and it was hard to know what was real. Eventually, I got to the point where it's like, okay, this doesn't have to be scary. It's just my imagination. And I can sense like some of this is not real. Like there's not a sensory input that I'm feeling. It's just in my mind. But when you look at people with like schizophrenia, clearly they're having a dysfunctional experience. Something is going on in their head, and they may even be sensing something, but something feels not all put together. So how do you navigate all of this and make it something that's lucid and has utility rather than something that is frenetic and discombobulated?
By testing it out, by experimenting. So I was fortunate enough to have a training ground for developing my spiritual gifts. So when I had my first mentor and he brought me into his energy classes, I was with a group of about 8 to 10 other people where we were receiving things intuitively or clairvoyantly, and then like pairing up in twos and getting feedback. So for example, like one of my first trainings was I had to sit with this girl named Rita, and our instruction was to hold the person's energy in our hand and to ask their energy questions about whatever you want to know about the person. So we learned first how to feel energy, and then we learned how to feel I'll call a part of their aura or a part of their energy, literally like an energy ball, and hold it in our hands, kind of like a USB stick. And I would hold Rita's energy. I'd be like, okay, tell me about Rita's dislikes. And all of a sudden it went, "Do-do-do-do." There's like a drop, a download into my head. And I was like, okay, what I got was this. And she'd be like, whoa, how'd you know that? I'm like, okay, hold on, let me try something else. And then I would try it with harder and harder things. And each time she was blown away by the response. So that let me know the reality of it, that I wasn't just making it up. And that helped me build my confidence around it, so that I moved beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm like, okay, this is real, because I'm testing shit out, because I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic first. I came from being an illusionist to discovering real magic. And as an illusionist, you're taught how to mimic psychic ability through trickery. So my first line of defense is as a skeptic. So when I'm discovering these things, I'm approaching it very inquisitively, skeptically, but also openly. So it's the feedback that let me know what's real. As far as what you were saying, like with schizophrenics, my understanding is that a schizophrenic is someone who cannot tell the difference between this reality and another reality. And so that blend is what makes them have the experience of being crazy or whatnot. And it's because everything's just real to them. I would dare to say that a clairvoyant, a psychic, is a positive version of schizophrenia. We could just tell the difference. I know when I'm looking into another realm, and I know when I know how to not, I don't want to use the word control, but if I'm seeing something, or if I were to see something dark or convoluted, I have the wherewithal to know, I'm like, pay no mind to that. So, yeah.
So David Lyon, hypnotist, mystic, and positive schizophrenic. Put that in the Instagram bio.
That's my bio.
I wonder if the clients tell you and start attracting that. That would be interesting.
Yeah, seriously. Come work with a schizophrenic.
Wonderful. Cool. Okay. So if we look at this, then basically the difference between like being schizophrenic and dysfunctional is that you literally can't tell the difference between what's real and what you said another reality, actually.
Yeah.
Whereas you, and this is an interesting framing, you said you can tell the difference between this reality and another reality, or even something that's imagined.
Mm-hmm.
How can you discern the difference? Like, what do you use to say, oh, okay, that's real versus that's like something else?
I pay attention to my resonance. I have a very good sense of discernment. There's times where, like, let's say I'm in a relationship situation and I'm having an intuition around something, and I'm like, oh, I feel like she's doing this. Well, I'm capable enough to ask myself, I'm like, well, is this coming from reactivity? Is this coming from charge? It's a method of self-inquiry to know, like, am I coming from a healthy, centered space? So it just takes kind of checking yourself.
And I guess the proof is in the results.
Exactly.
Because you work with hundreds, thousands of people at this point, and you can see their results consistently. Like, people are getting positive changes in their life, regardless of whether we know the origin of where those changes are coming from.
Oh yeah, I've had moments, few and far between, but I've had moments where I literally thought I was having psychosis, and I'm like, am I making all this shit up? Because I would go through these really hard times where, when I'm in denser states where I wasn't able to experience the reality of my gifts, and I was, vibrating more low, and I would be there for such extended periods of time that you almost start to forget the reality of your spirituality, of your spiritual gifts. So I'd be like, was I making that all up? Am I crazy? And I would go into these spirals, and the thing that would sober me up would be like, well, if I was making it up, it wouldn't impact so many people. I wouldn't have known these things that people are confirming for me. I wouldn't, so that would be the thing that brought me back. I'm like, okay, no, there's a reality to this, because otherwise someone would have said you're crazy by now, and I wouldn't have been successful with this.
And when you cure someone with gallstones or remove epilepsy, you can actually confirm that.
Yeah, and again, that's hypnosis, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting the difference.
Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things you've talked about throughout this conversation is energy.
Mm.
And we all know that energy exists in the universe, but often in these more spiritual spaces, when people talk about energy, I'm like, I don't really know what that actually means. Like, I'm not sure if people are talking about nonverbal cues that they pick up from people or something else. So what is your definition of energy?
I don't know that I know how to define that. For me, everything is energy. Like, what's not energy, I think, is a better question. So I don't have I really don't have a definition, but everything's energy.
So when you talk about like sensing the energy, what do you mean? Even if it's just by reference to what it feels like, what does that mean for you?
When someone walks in a room and they're pissed off, you feel that. How do you feel that?
I guess I just sense it.
You're feeling their energy,
Yeah.
right? You feel the temperature that they're vibrating, in a sense. Even if they, they're not showing it in their face, you just feel it. Or sometimes you walk in a room and you don't know why, but you're like, something's off here, right? How do you know that? You're sensing energy, and you're sensing it because you're able to sense the offness because you're not in a space of offness. You're in a space of harmony, or you're in a space of in your center. So you could feel that which is not you. You could feel that which is, discordant from what you're experiencing. So that's energy. It's or those kinds of examples.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to maybe frame it in a way that we can understand, even if we're not as sensitive as you, it's basically the combination of nonverbal information that you combine into a conclusion, which is, you feel their anger, you feel their joy, you feel their sadness. And I don't know if it's pheromones, I don't know if it's their body heat, I don't know if it's just like how they're positioned. Maybe it's all stuff that we pick up unconsciously, but I think everyone knows what it's like to pick up on someone's emotions.
Absolutely. And it's not limited to being in a physical space with someone, right? You can sense someone's energy who's nowhere close to you. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of just knowing something's up with your mom, or your dad, where you're just like, you pick up, you're like, Mom, you good? And you're like, yeah, this is funny. I was just thinking about you. Yeah, I was going through this thing, and so it's not limited to our physical space. It's an attunement thing that you can learn to be more and more sensitive to.
I haven't had that experience with my mom. I did have a really weird experience where she had a dream about, I think, a woman that I was seeing that she didn't know that I was seeing. And like, she looked like her, everything. And it was like pretty freaky because she like called me and told me about it. That was the first time that ever happened to me.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does suggest that there's connection across long distances that is more than just like what we're physically picking up from people. And in quantum physics, they talk about quantum entanglement. So the idea that two subatomic particles change in the position of one can change in the position of another, even at super long distances. So I guess at a subatomic level, we can see that links between particles or subatomic particles at long distances are real.
Yep.
And I guess you could say that happens on a macro scale too. But I guess this is where the skeptic heart comes in.
Bring it.
It's so easy to look at a few instances of this happening and ignore all the instances where it doesn't happen, which is just confirmation bias. So as someone who I know holds himself to a really high standard around his work and is impacting people, how do you keep yourself honest? Like, how do you keep yourself accountable in this work?
I think by saying I don't know when I don't know, and speaking honestly when I feel that I do know. It's I have no agenda behind it. My intention is always the highest good for all involved. That's like my repetitive intention when I'm about to give session or I'm about to work with someone, or just period. It's highest good for all involved. And I gain nothing through, I don't know, making myself look a certain way. I do my best to explain these things, but yeah, I think just by being honest and just saying, if I don't know, I don't know. If I do know, I'll share it with you, and being willing to be in the dance and see what resonates. At the end of the day, I just care, does this information resonate? I don't care if you believe me or not. I just care, is this helpful? Does it resonate? Will it change your life? That's what matters to me.
one of the reasons I invited you on this podcast is because I just feel the energy of your honesty and your realness and your pureness, and you're the kind of person who can go from talking about Thoth and how you're communicating with him in 1 minute, and then the next minute is like, hey, want to play Smash Bros and smoke weed and all these things that I don't associate with spiritual people at all.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. I mean, we're here in LA, and I live in LA, and Amari and I were talking about the kind of brand of LA spirituality. There's this like this veneer of spirituality that feels like what it's actually masking is just more egoic ends. Like the desire to look good and look at my gifts and look how advanced I am and look how much white I wear. And of course I say that as I wear white. And I think it's innocent. Like, I don't think people are actually out to harm, and I think there's a lot of good in it, but there's almost a sense of like spiritual celebrity. And spiritual posturing that's just more ego. And ego's so clever, it can find anything to mount itself upon to look good relative to other people. Whereas I don't get that with you. Like, I very much just feels like, hey, I'm here to serve. I'm actually good with who I am. I'm not trying to be perfect. Like, I see the way you live. You really do live with ease. Why do you think that there's this desire with people to tap into maybe what are legitimate gifts, but use them to basically fulfill egoic ends? And how does someone escape from that? Because I've been guilty of it too.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, to be honest. Like, I would imagine it comes from a place of inadequacy, just feeling inadequate, wanting to find belonging, and then you find people who share beliefs that you share, in spirituality, and so you position yourself in certain ways to like talk very melodically and take deep breaths all the time.
You know who I'm talking about. No one in particular. It's just it's an archetype.
It's just an archetype. But I think you you used the perfect word. There's an innocence to it. It's just everyone's trying to find their way, and whether you do it through spirituality or not, everyone's just trying to find their way. And it just so happens that with spirituality, it seems to get a little bit more colorful, and at the end of the day, I still think it's great because the intention is there. The intention to become more embodied or to become more authentic is there. Whether that intention is met with aligned action is in question, but the intention is there. So I do see it as a good stepping stone. It's like when you have training wheels on your bike, it's a good training wheel to develop a pseudo spiritual personality sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think what matters most, when I think of being spiritual, to me, that just means recognizing that there's more to this world than the physical. It's recognizing that you are spirit, which is, the word I'm using for more than the physical. And when you start to recognize, like, okay, wait, there's more to me than this physical life, and it just makes sense to me. I don't fully get it yet, but what does that actually mean for me? That becomes a spiritual pursuit. That's it. To me, it's like once you recognize that you're more than this body, you're spiritual. You don't need to do yoga or be vegan or dress in white or and do long staring contest or none of that shit. Like like you can, but to each his own.
So you can be spiritual, still smoke weed, and play Smash Bros, right?
You're right here, my brother.
Praise the Lord. That's kind of spirituality I'm looking for, man. Cool. Thank you. I'm glad we talked about that because it's tough. Like, I think it's possible to have a genuine awakening experience, genuinely have some sort of expanded sense of self, but still want to take that expanded sense of self and use it to fulfill your sense of inadequacy or your desire to look good to other people. So I think it's like it's almost harder to detect a lot of the time because it's mixed in with truth.
Yeah.
It's mixed in. And I think there's a lot of people who are genuinely very powerful and have realized something very true about themselves, who are unconsciously acting out negative patterns and using that position of power in an abusive way. And as you said, it's innocent. I think we're all susceptible to it to some degree. How do we protect ourselves from it, though? Because I think particularly with plant medicine on the rise, I don't know how much experience you have with it.
Some.
In those spaces, you're so vulnerable. Like psychologically, you're so vulnerable. Like I'm not sure the science of it, but certainly your unconscious mind is far more ripe or exposed. And in those spaces, like there's obviously the gross manipulation and taking advantage of people, like, you know, physical abuse. But in the psychological sense, it's very easy to just follow a guru or give away your authority or decide, yeah, I'm just going to keep on doing this thing because I think it's helping me. So how does one ground these expansive experiences in a way that protects ourselves?
I don't know that protection is necessary.
Oh, hot take. Tell me more.
Yeah, I don't know that protection is necessary because oftentimes it's our really dark experiences that lead to our greatest revelations and gifts and purpose. You know, I'm someone who went through a lot. I went through a lot of spiritual abuse. With my original mentor was one of my greatest blessings and also one of my darkest times. You know, it was extremely painful at some point. And I, you know, at some point he basically taught me how not to be a mentor. I think that, you know, that was meant to happen because that lent itself to who I am today. So I don't know that protection is the answer there. But in terms of how to ground these spiritual experiences, I'm reminded of the Einstein quote, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." And I think that's a really good guideline for people. You know, when you're in these expanded states or you're experiencing these things, enjoy it, like enjoy the celestial nature of it, but bring it down to earth. You know, recognize the heart speaks simple. The mind likes fancy. You know, only people who have read the same spiritual books as you will understand your chakra talk, right? But the masses won't understand you. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but just as a practice of embodiment and being grounded and being centered, it's good to practice the art of simplicity and just seeing where a lot of your expression might be fluff and just, what's the word? Like, not fantasy, but like when you over...
Hyperbolic?
Hyperbolic, yeah, thank you. Hyperbole, yeah. You'll see yourself where there's certain things that are hyperbolic. Time chamber, Goku. And, you know, where you could ground certain things in. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So basically, keep it simple. If it doesn't sound simple, maybe they don't understand it as well. They sound they do.
Yeah.
Sound like they do.
Yeah, and again, it's like there's nothing wrong with these experiences. Like, you know, you want to do 1,000 plant ceremonies a year, you can do it. You know, you'll have whatever experiences you have. You know, I don't necessarily think it's good for you, but I don't think it's bad for you either. I think it's just, you know, you're going to walk your path, I just think it is important to... Mastery could only ever be found in sobriety. You know, plant teachers, they might give you access to the realms, but there's a reason why they're called a teacher. They're teaching you that these frequencies exist. They're teaching you that these realities exist, so that just by virtue of remembering it, you would start to access those frequencies. So for me, the mastery is learning how to integrate that into your sober state and access those realms without needing the teacher. That's the graduation.
Yeah. And that really speaks to me because I know over the last 3 years, plant medicine has been a really powerful teacher for me, but that's just it. Like I still got to go actually apply the lessons in life.
Yeah.
And I was finding that I was in a pattern of going into one ceremony, knowing what my next ceremony was. It's like if I'm going into my ceremony, which is supposed to be medicine, which is supposed to make me healed, thinking about when I'm going to need to do more medicine, implying that the medicine I'm doing now is not enough to heal me, then it's clearly a cycle.
Yeah, I think one of the issues is that people see plant medicine as a way to solve their problems. And that's not what it's for. Plant medicine is not there to solve your problems. It's there to make you conscious of the unconscious, right? It gives you clarity, which as a side effect can help you solve problems, but it's you doing the problem solving through your own realization. But if you approach it as, okay, I need this to solve my problems, well, you might start to develop an addiction, and unfortunately that's what's happened to a lot of people, especially in the Western world, where, for the smallest thing, it's like, okay, I'm going to go do ayahuasca. I'm like, all right, you can, or you could journal, you could go within, you could talk to someone, it doesn't need to be through a plant medicine teacher. And I'm more so saying that to bring awareness to people who are using it as a crutch when they're not broken. When you're broken, you need a crutch. And by broken, I mean like you're at wit's end, you're suicidal, you're just genuinely fucked up. Even the term medicine, what my guide shared with me is that it was originally called plant medicine because it healed you from the sickness of the experience from being disconnected from God, from source, from the universe. But once you recognize that that's not the case anymore, and you know that you are connected, you don't need medicine, right? So even calling it plant medicine becomes a little bit dangerous. I told you a story where, I was talking to someone and they're like, oh yeah, I did this plant medicine and I'm doing medicine again. I did medicine 500 times. And I literally looked at them. I'm like, how sick are you? And they literally got caught off guard. I was saying it innocently because it was just so shocking to me. But they were just like, oh shit. Like it was a wake up call for them, so it helps to bring some consciousness to these things.
Or calling doing drugs medicine.
Right.
It's like, hey, you could do drugs.
Yeah. I mean, like,
just don't call it medicine.
That's it. Like it's Molly. Okay. It's not, it's a drug.
Yeah. It's like, you're a Burning Man. You're going to have a good time. That's okay.
Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah. I'm glad we talked about this. It's a very real situation.
100%.
So one of the things we talked on, but surprisingly haven't touched on too much, is this idea of God. What is God?
When I was a kid, so I've always had a very strong connection with God. I don't know why. It doesn't come from religion. I don't remember it coming from my mom. I was raised by my mom. As far as I remember, I always had a strong connection with God. I would I'll say him, but I'm not necessarily being masculine, feminine, but I would talk to him. I would speak to him in my dreams. And I remember when at some point, I think I was about 6 years old, I got really curious and I asked it, I'm like, what are you? And immediately what popped in my imagination is I was shown God as the ocean and each of us as the unique waves of the ocean. And so you could have a tidal wave, a big wave, a small wave. All these waves can have these different characteristics and be individual, but they all stem from the one ocean. So my understanding of God is literally all that is. So it's not all that is except you or all that is except that cup. It's literally all that is. If you refer to Hermeticism, they say everything exists within the mind of God. So it's all God.
Is this cup God?
Absolutely.
Is this cup conscious?
It is made from the fabric of consciousness.
Got it. There's one of my favorite theories in all of philosophy. It's called panpsychism. And panpsychism is basically a solution to what's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is plagued philosophers forever, which is basically, what is consciousness? Because it's really hard to define. It's one of the only things in science that we can't define, but we know we have.
Right.
Because we know we're experiencing something. And panpsychism proposes that everything is consciousness. Like there's not any distinction like conscious, unconscious. Everything is conscious down to the atoms.
Yep.
But when we talk about spirit and spirituality, it feels like you're talking about something that's different than consciousness. Are you, or are they one and the same?
No, I'm not talking about something that's different. When I'm talking about spirit, I'm talking about an aspect of consciousness.
Ah, okay. So does this cup have a spirit?
I wouldn't say this cup has a spirit, no. I would more so say that it's composed of spirit. I would say everything in this reality is composed of spirit, intelligent energy. That would be my assessment. Yeah.
Okay, let me understand that. So what does it mean for something to be composed of spirit but not have a spirit?
Have a spirit is like you possess it.
Okay.
You know, like you possess a spirit. But from my experience, you know, I see this reality like a dream. You know, and the same thing, like when you're sleeping and you're dreaming at night and you fully believe you're that person in that dream, I see no difference between what's happening in this reality. It's a perfect analogy, you know, and just like when you die in a dream, you wake up and you're like, oh, I thought I was that person in the dream and those experiences have meaning to me, but this is who I really am. That, in my experience, because I've been hypnotized to go to the spirit realm, to literally, I've gone to my past life and gone through my death scene. So I experienced my death and explored what happened after I died, but before I reincarnated again. So life between lives. And in that experience, it was a lot like waking up from a dream. It literally felt like, you know, when you bunch your socks into like a ball and then you unfold those socks so that they become two. That unfolding is what it felt like to reemerge into spirit for me. So if we look at it from the perspective that you're in spirit right now, dreaming that you're not, then this dream that we call physical reality is made up of you, is made up of consciousness, is made up of spirit. So that's why I say this is made up of spirit, this is made up of spirit, this is made up of God. It's all of the same fabric.
So this cup, it doesn't have a spirit, but there's a spiritual dimension to the cup.
Yeah, I guess that's fair to say.
Okay, so there's like a transcendental nature of it. Like here's just the cup, the physical, but there's a transcendental nature to it.
I would say, in my words, I would say everything is spirit.
Okay.
There's nothing that's not spirit.
Got it. So everything is spirit. So the cup is spirit too.
Yes.
So does everything is spirit, but are there certain things that have a spirit? Like, do you have a spirit in a way that's different than the cup, or are you just a different configuration of spirit and consciousness experience?
I think linguistically, this is a really good question. I think linguistically we'll say the words, I have a spirit, but I don't think it's accurate. You know, I think it would be more accurate to say we are spirit.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Okay. Have you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once?
No.
I'm going to mention it like every podcast. I love this. It's my second favorite movie after The Matrix. I think it's my second favorite. There's this scene, spoiler warning, where they basically keep on reincarnating, or you could say switching realities. And they go through like different timelines of themselves, and then in different people's bodies, and then aliens, and then humans, but with some weird modification, like a super long nose or something. Then eventually, one of my favorite scenes of the movie is they incarnate as rocks. And they're just rocks sitting on a planet, having an experience as rocks. And there was something about that scene that, besides being brilliant and hilarious, actually just felt very resonant to me. It's like, yeah, what's to say that everything doesn't have an experience? Now, it might not be sentient. Yeah. Sentience and life are different than conscious, but it could be that there's something that it is like to be a rock. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah.
Cool. So is that the sense in which you think everything is a spirit?
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So if everything is spirit, what is the self? Because the reason I ask this question is another problem in philosophy is that it's very hard to point to anything that's consistent. Even in you, like in the course of this conversation, you've lost, I don't know, millions of atoms. I don't know how many atoms, but a lot of them. And new ones have come in. If we were to cut off your arm, you'd still be David Lyon. We would still refer to you as David Lyon.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for us to actually understand what is David Lyon, especially when you think about crazy stuff like people doing heart transplants. Like if the physical heart is put in another being, are they still the same being? So what is the sense of self that we believe to be stable, if it even exists at all, to you?
You know, what comes to me is that Alan Watts quote where he says, "We're all God pretending that we're not." You know, it comes from the idea that there's only one being in all of existence, only one me in all of existence. So from that standpoint, I would say that yourself or myself is a wave in the ocean.
And a wave in the ocean is just a modification of the ocean. It's just a perturbation in the ocean. It's not a discrete thing.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So one of the things that I know you talked about in your YouTube video, and I also overheard in a conversation that you're having, was this distinction between doing inner work, which implies working on the self. I'm working on myself for fucking ever.
Yeah.
Versus expansion.
Yes.
Is the idea of doing inner work even comprehensible if you're just a wave anyway? You're just a continuum of experience. There's no stable thing.
I would say so, yeah. You know, because what generally happens with people is they discover spirituality or something of the sort, personal development, and they discover inner work and they're like, oh shit, I could heal these things inside of me. I don't just have to live with them. You know, that's what I thought. I thought, you know, the pains I had, I just had to go through life and live with them. But we discover inner work and we're like, oh, there's a way to heal these things. And then we start to go on this binge where we're like, well, I want to heal everything inside of me. But I would say that the purpose of inner work is to teach you compassion and forgiveness, especially self-compassion and self-forgiveness, because those are the things that heal, or those are some of the things that heal the traumas that we have inside of us. And when we do it enough, we start to come back into harmony with who we are, with ourself, with our authentic nature, with our inner being, whatever language you want to use. Once you start to get in touch with who you are and you feel your true self again, then you're going to get in touch with your sense of excitement, your sense of creativity, your sense of passion, joy, inspiration. Once that's in play, for the most part, you don't obsessively need to do inner work anymore. Not obsessively, because people become inner workaholics, right? And you know, just with the way physics and the universe works, if you're constantly focusing on problems to solve inside yourself, well, you're just going to attract more problems to solve. So you're going to be like, okay, I'm good. I'm bad. I'm good. I got triggered. I'm good. My mom said that, right? It's a constant up-down experience that so many people could relate to. And they're like, oh, another layer. Oh, another layer. But you're creating that illusion. You're creating that experience for yourself because you're focusing on problems to fix. But again, if you're in that space where you have a sense of self and you know yourself to a degree and you know what your calling is, your inspiration is, which direction you're being pulled towards, your excitement, this is where we could look at stepping into expansion instead of inner work. So for example, if you're in a position in your life where you're just feeling trapped, let's say, you're just like, man, I feel really just trapped in my life because my life is, you know, it's just set up a certain way. I'm just feeling really trapped. You could look at why you feel trapped, which is inner work. So you could be like, oh, I feel trapped because my mom locked me in a closet when I was 5 and I should go heal that, right? Which is, sure, you could do it. Or you could be like, okay, you feel trapped. What feeling are you looking to feel more of? And it might be like freedom, adventure. I'd be like, okay, perfect. That's expansive. And if you're focusing on your power, if you're focusing on your potential, well, now you're going to attract more of that instead of more problems. And the beauty of this is if you were to focus on the adventure that you want to feel and just say, fuck it, you know what? I'm booking this ticket and I'm going to the Fiji Islands. By embodying more of your, what I'm calling your higher self, the more liberated self, as a side effect, you're going to release the lower self issues that you would have resolved in inner work anyway. So it's a much healthier way of going about things, and it's also the way that your higher self operates.
So it's the difference between a progressive and a regressive model of growing.
Yes.
The regressive model is to keep on finding problems and trying to fix problems, fix yourself endlessly.
Yes.
The progressive model is identify who you want to be and the experiences you want to have and the feelings you want to feel and go for those.
Exactly. A perfect example of this is I remember when I broke up with one of my exes, I was really going through it and I was doing all the healing work. And it's like, sometimes when you're in it, you forget about your own teachings. You forget about how, the best way of doing things because you're just so in it. And so I was getting sessions and I was doing the healing work and doing forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. And I noticed that at some point, even though I was healing, I wasn't actually feeling any more alive. I was actually just feeling very robotic and like numb, just feeling boring. And then I stopped. I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, I'm doing inner work. I'm just constantly doing inner work. I'm like, what do I actually want to feel? What am I looking for? And it was like fun. I just want to feel fun. I'm like, okay, fun. Got it. What's the inspiration I have that goes with fun? And I was like, book a bus ticket to San Diego. I wanted to go see my friend. I'm like, cool. So I booked the bus ticket. I go to San Diego. And so now that I acted on fun, I brought my vibration from here to here. So I raised it a little bit. And I get to where I was going in San Diego and I have a house to myself. I was kicking it with my friend. So kicking it with my friend raises my vibration too, go from here to here. Eventually I get the house to myself. I decide to put on some music. And I'm just dancing by myself, dancing in the mirror. And as I'm dancing, having fun, I'm raising my vibration from here to here to here to here until eventually I get into that vibrational vicinity of where revelation exists. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, as I'm dancing, I just get hit with that's what I needed to see about all the things I'd been working on in a way that was way more fun, way more easy. So it's like I got all the realization and revelation without all the heavy lifting. So as I embodied my higher self, as a side effect, I released my lower self issues.
One of the things you said to me early in me knowing you is that basically the energy or the emotion of spirit is light. Basically, you said something to the effect of one of the biggest mistakes people make with spirituality is they're too fucking heavy.
Right. Too serious.
We're too serious. There we go. And it's very easy when you think of yourself as something that needs to be healed and I need to do inner work to just enter that seriousness by default. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that the whole point of the work is so that you can play.
Yes.
If you're working so that you can do more work, then what's the point? I mean, if you see children, they're here to play. Mm-hmm. And then as a child, you think that when you grow up, you're just going to get bigger toys and play more. Mm-hmm. Like, the Ferrari is not that different than the Hot Wheel, except it just costs a lot more money, but you're there to have fun with it.
Yes.
So how does someone escape this very easy pitfall of inner work for the sake of inner work rather than actually to advance to a place of play and expansion?
That's a good question. I don't know if this will answer it, but what comes to me is, so I remember back when I was living in Montreal, I was obsessively doing spiritual growth, but to the point that on some level subconsciously, it's because I also believed I wasn't ready to do the things I actually wanted to do. I wanted to start serving people. I wanted to start going bigger and growing my platform or whatever it was I was desiring. And I kept telling myself, I'm like, not ready yet. I still need to grow more. Not ready yet. Still need to grow more. And then one day, I remember I was on Instagram and I came across a quote that just struck me. And it said, if you spent as much time on spiritual service as you did on spiritual growth, then you'd be successful. And I was like, damn.
Listeners in a body bag on the floor. Let's get him out. Save him. Save him, David.
Yeah. So that changed everything for me because it just made me see where I was playing it safe and creating the illusion that I needed to grow myself more and needed to get more prepared and more ready in order to do the thing that I'm called to do. But in reality, if you're receiving a calling, it's because you're ready for it. You don't receive inspirations you're not ready for. You receive them because you're ready. So again, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's what came to me when you asked.
So if by analogy, we talk about the spiritual service as your play, because I can tell you actually really enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
So play is not necessarily, go fuck around and go party. It can be play and service.
Yeah. And just sorry to cut you off, but play is also a state of being. Oftentimes when I remember having a client and I was telling him to be more playful, and he was interpreting it as, oh, I have to go to the park, or I have to go do something fun. And I was like, no. I'm like, you could just approach things playfully. Like, you could eat a sandwich playfully if you really wanted to. It's a state of being different than seriousness and rigidity. It's letting yourself lighten up.
And if I could add, it's non-attachment to outcome.
Yes.
That's how play is different than work.
Yeah.
And you can make anything work. I mean, I remember preparing for this podcast, I was making it work. I was like, oh my God, it needs to be great. I need to be fire. I need to ask amazing questions. It needs to be the best conversation ever. And then eventually, honestly, probably part of the way through the podcast, I was like, oh, I'm just playing.
Yes.
I'm just enjoying myself. Wherever it goes, it goes. And ironically, that's when we're really powerful. Mm-hmm. So you asked if you answered the question before. I mean, I think if we think of the calling as a calling to play, and instead of a calling to go achieve something, then yeah, you just start before you think that you're ready, because you're ready the moment you get the calling. You're always ready to play.
That's it, and play is so much more powerful than seriousness. It's literally a higher vibration than seriousness. So when you're in a state of play, you're literally accessing more of your potential than you would if you're in a state of rigidity. So if you want to be in a more effective leader or entrepreneur or service provider, play is the way.
This is so challenging, actually, in a sense, because do you have a religious upbringing?
I mean, I was raised Jewish, but not religious.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, are you Jewish?
I'm Jewish.
You're a black Jew?
I'm a Jew-making.
Holy shit, Jew-making? Jew-rock. Wow, that's crazy. I just learned that.
Yeah.
So if that's you're blowing my mind in real time. I'm trying to recover. So I think, at least for me, I grew up Catholic, and I wasn't like super devout, but I went to Catholic school. And religion is some form of spirituality. It's just usually much more structured, and there's a lot of doctrine and dogma in there. And it was all so serious, dude.
Yeah. Like,
all so serious. I mean, the core of it is do these things, otherwise you're going to hell. So there ain't no play. The stakes are super high, as high as they can get.
Yeah.
So it's actually challenging, I think, for me to even understand. It's like, no, like, play is good. Like, you don't need to achieve anything. Like, you're just here to actually play. So I'm curious, when you work with people who have like religious programming, do you deal with that any differently than you deal with people who maybe came from a non-religious space?
Probably. I mean, most people who I work with have had some sort of religious programming or religious trauma or something like that. I just find a way to make it make sense for them, and usually that's through logic, even if the logic is something as simple as, well, if you're doing something seriously and you're experiencing frustration and resistance, and that's generally what happens when you do something seriously, that doesn't sound very logical to me. Where on the flip side, if we look at instances of your life where you let yourself do things for fun, for example, when we discover our passions, when we discover what we love to do, that's really fun. But then there becomes this moment that happens, usually unconsciously, where your passion starts to get noticed and you realize, like, someone tells you, you can make money with that. And then your passion starts to feel like work. And it's a very, I don't want to use the word dangerous, but it's a very dangerous transition, because that's usually where people lose sight of the real original reason why they started doing that thing. And so generally I just find a way to remind people of why they got into what they're doing and how it actually makes sense logically. It's like, you did this for fun. You did this because you love it. You didn't do it for the money. It's like the fun attracts the money, but it's just about giving some helpful reminders.
So let me channel something for you on behalf of the curious skeptic.
Let's go.
who is me. And there's a part of me who I'm certainly way more playful than I used to be. But there's still this voice in the back of my head that's like, okay, dude, you got to like work to afford this nice house, to afford equipment for this podcast. And there's a sense in which it's like, okay, if I played fully, everything would get taken care of. But there's also a lack of trust of that, honestly. It just feels so distant. How do we close the gap on the desire to fulfill a need and the desire to play? Like, how do we recognize that playing will fulfill your needs?
Well, it looks like in your mind, you're believing that you would be doing different things if you were playing. Meaning the things that are important to you, it looks to me like you're thinking that if you were playing, then you wouldn't want to do these things playfully, because playing would just be video games and fucking around.
Which is actually not true. I'm actually doing exactly what I want to do right now.
Right.
This is play, and it'll hopefully get my needs met. So, that's really interesting.
That's clairvoyance, by the way.
Hey, ready, my mind?
Yeah.
Cover it. Can't see me. Get out.
Tinfoil hat.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, so you're just bringing play to the things that are exciting to you, because all the things that you're wanting to do for work are things that on the core level light you up. You want to be doing this podcast, you want to be doing lineage, you want to be serving people and building community. Like, that's something that you genuinely want to do. It's only when your mind meets that inspiration with seriousness that does it feel heavy and bogged down. But if your mind were to meet it with playfulness, well, now you're dancing. Now you're in a flow. Like, now you're being more effective, more efficient, and doing things more effortlessly. So it doesn't leave the important things out. It amplifies them.
And then you're going to do those things better anyway.
Exactly.
It's always been interesting. When I look at the people that we respect the most, athletes are one of them. And when we think of athletes, what are they doing? They play.
Yeah.
They play. Even if it's super focused, intentional, they care. They literally would give their life to win. It's still play.
Exactly.
We hold that in the highest regard. And there's a sense in which if you're playing but you're not present and you're focused on the outcome, you're going to do worse. Like, if you're there going for a free throw and you're constantly thinking about, oh my God, we got to win this game, I hope I don't miss, you're going to do worse. So it requires actually releasing the outcome for that moment to be in presence.
Exactly. There's a saying that says something along the lines of, when you get to the point where people can't tell whether you're playing or working, that's when you found your mastery. And that's the whole point. It's like, for me, there's no difference between when I'm giving a session or I'm just living life. Like, it all feels the same. There's not like a different mode I go into. It's always me being me. Like, whether I'm being a brother, I'm like, hey, let me help out with this thing, or it's a client session. It's the exact same approach for me.
David, I want to talk about bad versus good. Do you believe in bad versus good? Like, that there's good and bad?
Yeah, I would say morally, yeah. Theoretically, yeah.
Theoretically, okay. Tell me if this has been your experience, but I find a lot of the time when people get into spiritual work, there's this pretense of self-judgment, like making oneself bad.
Yep.
I know my progression was, largely unaware, not thinking about this stuff, to, oh my God, there's so many things wrong with me, to, wait, there's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad, to, wait a second, no, good and bad is a useful paradigm to use to sort through things in the world. So, as someone who obviously is working with people to help them heal, when you know someone has done something that is morally bad, how do you help them integrate that and heal that in a way that is honest and not just like spiritually bypassing and escaping, but helps them advance rather than just sink into guilt and shame?
By helping them return to their innocence. On some level, when anyone does a bad thing, there is a level of innocence that's present. Someone who takes advantage of a woman, that's a really shitty thing to do on one level, if we're looking at it morally. And then on a spiritual level, or on I'll say a holistic level, there's also an innocence present. I'm not saying they're innocent, as an innocent guilty, but I'm saying there's an innocence of like, I just don't know how to connect with women, right? And so when I could connect them to their innocence, that automatically dissolves the shame. And then now they're in their seat of power. And once you're in your seat of power, now we can work. Now I could plug you into bigger and better things that will change, your world and the world of those around you. So you stop playing things out, because anywhere where you carry shame, you're going to repeat. That's why addictions are addictions, is most people feel ashamed that they keep picking up the bottle of alcohol, but shame has to attract more shame, more reasons to feel shameful. If we could return people to their innocence, it empowers them. It's like, oh yeah, that's true. It doesn't absolve what was done. It doesn't, make it like, oh, well, it's good that you did that, right? But it just sobers you up. It clarifies you. It puts you in a seat of power.
Sure. I love that.
I think that's really important for people to hear, because I think a lot of the time in these discussions around people who have done bad things, we make them fundamentally bad.
Right.
And then we just want to throw them away. And that's actually one of the most damaging things you can do, because if someone feels ashamed and if someone feels guilty, they start doing what guilty people do.
Right.
And they actually start hurting people more. When we talk about the difference between doing something bad and being bad, what's the difference to you?
I think it's just a value judgment. I think it's just based on your own values and morals, and like for some people, when you meet someone, it's good to shake their hand. But I think in some places in the world, if you go to shake their hand, it's I think it's in Japan or China, I don't remember where it is, but it's seen like, what are you doing? So I think it's just a value judgment. I don't really see much of a difference between being bad and doing bad, because if you're being bad, you're gonna do bad. But I could also zoom out and see the other lens of there is no good and bad. I can see that perspective as well, but I just see the usefulness of both. I think it's important to be like, yeah, that was really fucked up, and there's this, because I'm talking to you on a human level. But if we're going on a very, I guess, fundamental or spiritual level, sure, it's, there is no good, there is no bad. Everything's aligned, everything's perfect. And I could say that, I'm kind of just, I'm not saying it very seriously now, but I can say that in a more deep way, where I'm actually like, yeah, that's also true. So it just depends what lens we're talking from.
So basically, the zoomed out, we can call it at consciousness or spiritual perspective, it's there's no good and bad. It's just all consciousness or spirit experiencing itself.
For example, I had a client who was about to get married. She was engaged and she was going to get married at however many months ahead of time. But she felt really ashamed because she had cheated on her fiance. And so she came to me for a healing session. Now, we could say on a moral level, oh, she did a bad thing. But from my perspective and what was relevant for that vantage point, she didn't do anything wrong. She was acting on where she was feeling called in the moment. That's what felt aligned for her, and it served a big purpose. I don't fully remember all the lessons that came through. Yeah, it's something to do with like reclaiming her passion and her wild side. I don't fully remember. But my ability to wholeheartedly see that that wasn't a bad thing and that it was actually a necessary thing for her is part of what allowed her to release the shame and also connect into the innocence, so that she could release that experience and feel whole again and feel good about moving forward with her marriage. So it really depends on, it's a case-by-case basis. Kind of, it depends on what we're using good and bad for, compared to the spiritual perspective of, well, this was actually something that you needed to have. It wasn't bad in the way that you're thinking it's bad. You needed this.
Yeah. So it's never bad in that it shouldn't have happened and the universe is an error.
Exactly.
It's bad in that there's a human real moral sense in which it was bad and misaligned with moral values.
Right. When I'm saying good and bad, I'm just speaking your language. I'm just Like, it's like if you're speaking Spanish, I'll speak Spanish too. So I'll speak that language because we're having a conversation on a certain dimension, but I also have simultaneously the angle of it was all meant to happen.
Bueno.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. So I know we're running out of time here.
Yeah.
And I do want to get to a full comprehensive understanding of a David Lyon framework, but we're going to translate it a bit.
Cool.
So that for people who is like soul, spirit, like, I don't know, that's too much for me, we can find some terms that just make sense for them.
Mm-hmm.
So magic, can we say possibility?
Infinite possibility.
Infinite possibility. So magic is merely infinite possibility and tapping into a certain possibility.
I wouldn't use the word merely, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's just infinite possibility, bro.
Just infinite possibility.
Okay, yes. It is infinite possibility, exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Cool. Channeling is tapping into, and you're going to need to help me with this one.
Getting in the zone.
Okay, getting in the zone, and that zone can be associated with some sort of representation of an energy. So, for example, when we talk about Thoth, that can be tapping into the Thoth zone.
Yes.
Got it. So even if you don't believe it's another conscious being, everyone knows what it's like to tap into the zone, or like Mamba mentality, or just you're channeling Kobe.
Right. The thing of an actor, when an actor is playing a role, they're channeling a character, right? They're no longer being Will Smith. They're being whatever else,
Perfect. Higher self, we haven't really talked about that. How would you define it?
The butterfly to your caterpillar.
Beautiful. So the most evolved version of you?
The most evolved, the most liberated, the most alive, the most free, the most intuitive version of, the most fulfilled version of yourself.
So your best self.
Your best self.
Your best self. Spirit, an aspect of consciousness.
Yeah, we could say your essence.
Essence, okay. And that's actually really interesting because I think in Eastern traditions, consciousness is actually an experience of spirit. So spirit is fundamental. Even if you look at
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, if you look at even Western philosophy, Kant, he basically talks about things in themselves. So noumenon versus phenomenon, the experience of things, or Plato. So there's in different schools and traditions, this is congruent with what's taught in a lot of traditions. Love. What's love? Baby, don't hurt me.
I'll tell you how I learned love. I have heard really good definitions, but I want to give it from within myself. So for me, I remember one time, I have to give a little story for this. When I had one of my apartments in Montreal and I was living with my girlfriend at the time, she turned my house into a home. I had the bachelor pad, and then she came in with like the plants and decorations, and she like created the warmth, right? And then we broke up, and she was moving out, and she was about to take her plants. I was like, no, what are you doing? Like, leave the plants. She's like, are you going to take care of them? I'm like, yeah, I'll take care of it, of course. She's like, you're really going to take? I'm like, yeah, no, I promise, I'll take care of it. Like, just don't leave with the plants. And then she told me, she told me what to do to take care of the plants, and then she left. And so I was doing all the things and, watering it when I was told to water it, making sure it got sun. And for whatever reason, there was one plant that just started dying. And I could not for the life of me figure out why, because I was doing all the things you're supposed to do. So I called her up and I was like, this plant is dying. What do I do? And she's like, talk to it. And I was like, you want me to talk to the plant? She's like, yeah, they could hear you. They feel you. They have feelings too. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll try it. And it felt like a lot for me at the time. But what I decided to do is to make it playful. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give each of my plants a name so that it helps me personify it. And I think this one was Rosie or Pinky or something like that, because it had like rose-like leaves. So I gave it the name, I'll say Rose. And I'm like, and I would start to talk to him like, Rose, I want you to get better. I put my hands over it and I was just sending it love. And it was in this really like kind of crippled state, like just like disheveled. And then the next day rolled around and it was still dying. And then I was like, fuck. So I'm like talking to it. I'm like, Rose, let me know what you need. And I'm like putting on music that I think it would like. I'm like literally like treating it like a person. And now I'm actually like, I'm invested. I'm invested in this plant because it was actually bothering me that it was dying. I didn't care about myself. I cared about the health of this plant. And then later that night, all of a sudden, as I walked into my living room, I saw the plant was just like blossomed. It was super healthy. It was like brighter than it's ever been. And I was just like so happy. And it was this interesting feeling of feeling fulfilled and feeling grateful for something outside of myself. Like it had nothing to do with me. I just wanted the health and well-being of the plant, and that made me happy. And so for me, love is watering a plant. It's what you it's not something you're doing for you. It's this sweetness of emotion that you're offering to something else, you know. And you know, the definition that I heard that I liked was love is the absence of judgment.
So what's self-love then?
Self-love doesn't make much sense to me.
Hey.
Because you are love. You know, at the core of your being, you are love. So self-love implies that there's two. There's the self that you need to love, but you are love. So it never really computed for me, self-love. So I would, if I had to speak to it, I would say it's receiving the love of who you are. It's recognizing who you are at the core of your being. Because if I were to go deep down inside, you might think you're a bad person, but when you see your innocence and when you see your good, you'll feel love, and that love is you.
So this is a really beautiful way of articulating it, but B, this is one of the issues with talking about these subjects, because there's so many definitions that need to be defined to even talk about it. Because earlier we talked about the self, and whether it even exists and what it is, and we decided like it's like a wave in the ocean. So going back to that analogy, is the wave of the ocean love? Is the ocean love? Is everything love?
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. So everything is spirit, consciousness, and love.
Yes, the frequency of love. But then this goes into, you know, love means so many different things to so many different people.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where it might get a little tricky, and hopefully people are listening to this through feeling and not just paying attention to words, you know, because language is very primitive. But if we're able to feel, you know, it's like when we use the word fuck, it's like, I fucking love you, and like, oh, fuck this shit, right? Same word, different feeling. So as long as we're listening with our field, as long as we're listening with feeling, we'll get the deeper meaning in what's being said.
Final question. If someone's made it to the end of this podcast, clearly there's something in here that they want to embody more. There's something that they're hearing that's like a resonance. There's something in here they're like, yeah, I want that. And maybe their mind is running and just saying, hey, this is bullshit, this is all made up. But clearly something else, call it their self, their heart, their consciousness, their spirit, decided to stick through to the end. And that person is past me. What would you say to past me, or someone who's like the person I used to be, who really wants to cross the chasm, really wants to experience these things you're talking about, but just doesn't feel it yet?
What is that you desiring? Is my question.
To me?
Yeah, like what?
Wholeness.
If that's the case, then I would say to be willing to see yourself for who you truly are and not who you think you need to be. And what I mean by that is, in order to see yourself for who you truly are, you need to honor your passions. You need to honor your truth. You need to honor your essential nature. This is where I say more essence, less effort. See, until we devote ourselves to our truth, and I mean devote, not just like, for me, there's commitment and then there's devotion. You know, I've heard someone say like devotion is love infused commitment. It's not just I'm going to do this. It's like you're giving yourself to it. Until we devote ourselves to our truth and be like, this isn't working for me. I'm doing this because of other people's projections or other people's opinions or other people's beliefs, be it family or be it society. It's like, this isn't working for me. This isn't making me happy. We need to look at what is it that's going to serve your happiness. And step one of that is, well, what's your truth? Like, let's look at what your truth actually is as far as you as a being. So I would start with that exercise of, you know, the piece of paper that I said, draw a line in the middle, who you think you need to be and who you truly are, and start writing it out. And you're going to start to reveal to yourself where you're lying to yourself, where you're deluding yourself or illusioning yourself. I don't know if that's a word. Deluding. Yeah. Thank you. So you'll start to reveal those things for yourself, which is going to start to reveal your deeper truths, your deeper passions, your deeper inspirations. And chances are you're going to be afraid to act on those things because, you know, you think you should continue with the work path or you think you should continue with school or whatever it is. At the end of the day, if you really want to experience the wholeness that you already are, you have to let yourself water yourself with your passions, with your inspirations, with your intuitions, and then you're going to unfold into your true nature, into your happiness, into your fulfillment. Because we can't experience fulfillment as a character that we're not. It's just not possible. You know, if I've tried it, you know, like many of us have tried it. If we're moving through life pretending that we're macho and cool, but really we're kind of silly and sensitive, no matter what we do, we're not going to feel fulfilled. You know, fulfillment comes from being who you are, from knowing thyself and being thyself. So I would say if the desire is wholeness, be steadfast towards your truth. It's essential. I feel like I got more to say. Actually, give me a second. Yeah, I got more to say. I'm going to say some of the same things in a different word. If you're still listening to this podcast and there's something that you're looking for, that you've been reaching for in this podcast through our questions and answers, chances are it's your truth. And so there's something you're looking for and there's something you're not letting yourself fully attune to, but you know what your truth is. You know what your calling is. You know what your inspiration is. You know what inspirations you have on the back burner. You know what intuitions you have that you might not be listening to. But that is the path. You know, I often say our intuition and inspiration are our fork and knife on the dinner plate of life. It's all you really need. Those are the only two tools you really need, is your intuition and inspiration. Your joy, your passion, and excitement turns up the volume on those things, so you experience higher volumes of it. But your intuition and inspiration, it's right there. So if you're listening to this, I would ask you, like, what is your truth that you're not listening to? What are you resisting? You know, what inspirations do you have on the back burner? What intuitions are you not paying attention to? And serve them. Do that for 7 days. 7-day theory. You know, if God created the world in 7 days, whether that's true or not, it's a great metaphor that it takes 7 days to create a whole new universe, a whole new world for yourself. You know, and like Jay-Z said, difficult takes a day, impossible takes a week. So you could do the impossible or the I'm possible in a week, because what you're doing is every day of the week for 7 days is you're imprinting the reality of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday with the energy of your truth. You're saying, for these 7 days, I'm going to devote myself to my truth, to my inspiration, to my passions, no matter what, my highest excitement. Because in every given moment, there's a number of things you could choose to focus on. If you simply choose to focus on the thing that lights you up the most, the highest spark that you're curious about, that you're most attracted to, and you do that over and over and over again with no insistence on any outcome, you're just doing it because it lights you up. You're doing it because it feels good. Your life will become an explosion of magic and synchronicity, and you'll never go back. Because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be shifting from trying to figure things out to tuning into where things are figured out for you. And that's the magic of life.
David. Ineffable. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for being such a shining example of both rationality and mysticism in service of a higher good. And thank you so much for setting an example for me personally in my own life and for so many people. And I'm looking forward to people getting to hear your message through this podcast. I'm looking forward to people hearing your message through your expansion of your work. More street hypnosis, more magic, more medicine, whatever you got to give, the world needs it, and we welcome it. So thank you, brother.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Of course, man.
Yeah.
Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, if you want to check me out, my website's a great place, which is www.livingmagic.life. You could always look up my name, David Lyon, on YouTube or davidlyon.love on Instagram.
Fuck yeah,
bro.